They say love is blind. Mine wasn't just blind, it was wearing a blindfold, earplugs, and humming loudly to drown out the warning bells. My name is Zara. Before I met Neil, my world was code, algorithms, and the thrill of watching my tech startup, Innovate Solutions, take off. I was young, driven, and honestly, a little naive about how old money really worked. I'd poured my heart and soul, not to mention countless sleepless nights, into building something from scratch, something that was mine. And it was thriving. I felt like I was on top of the world. Then Neil walked into my life, or rather, into a tech conference where I was a keynote speaker. He was, different. Or so I thought. He was charming, handsome in that effortlessly polished way, and he laughed at my nerdy jokes. He seemed genuinely impressed by my work, not intimidated by it. He came from a world of inherited wealth, a stark contrast to my self-made success, but he never made it seem like an issue. "You're brilliant, Zara," he'd say, his eyes shining with what I mistook for admiration. "You built something from nothing. That's incredible." For a while, it felt like a fairy tale. He was attentive, supportive, and for the first time, I let myself imagine a future that wasn't just about boardrooms and Series A funding. The first dinner at his family's sprawling estate, however, felt less like an introduction and more like an inspection. The house itself was magnificent, a testament to generations of accumulated wealth, but it felt cold, almost museum-like. His mother, Mallory, was a woman who wore her pearls like armor and her smile like a weapon. Her eyes, a pale, assessing blue, swept over me, lingering a little too long on my dress, my shoes, my simple jewelry. His father, Robert, was quieter, a portly man, with a permanently skeptical arch to his eyebrows. He offered a limp handshake and then retreated behind a facade of polite disinterest, though I felt his gaze on me throughout the evening. And Chelsea, Neil's sister, just watched. Mostly she picked at her food and offered monosyllabic answers when I tried to draw her into conversation. "So, Zara," Mallory began, her voice smooth as silk, but with an edge I couldn't ignore. She was seated at the head of a ridiculously long mahogany table. "Neil tells us you're quite the innovator." She drew out the word as if it tasted foreign, or perhaps a little common. I smiled, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel under her scrutiny. "I love what I do, yes. Innovate Solutions is my passion." "How quaint," she murmured, taking a delicate sip of her wine. "It must be so exciting, all this new technology, so different from, well, established businesses with history, with legacy." The implication was clear. My work was a fleeting trend, while theirs was eternal. "There's certainly a different kind of energy," I agreed, trying to keep my tone light. "Fast-paced, always evolving." "Challenging, yes," she mused, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on her wine glass. "And I suppose some girls are just wonderfully ambitious these days, not content to just marry well." The dig was clear, a perfectly aimed dart. My cheeks burned. I glanced at Neil, hoping he'd say something, anything. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, offering a weak, apologetic smile in my direction, but remained silent. That silence was a punch to the gut. Robert chuckled softly. "Mallory, dear, you're embarrassing the girl." But there was no real reprimand in his voice, only a shared amusement. Chelsea actually looked up from her plate at that, a flicker of something. Pity? In her eyes before she quickly looked away. The rest of the evening continued in a similar vein. Mallory's questions were relentless, disguised as polite interest, but designed to highlight my new money background against their established legacy. She asked about my parents, my upbringing, my education, each question a subtle probe for weaknesses, for signs that I wasn't their kind. She made comments about modern women and their interesting career choices, always with that slight, condescending smile. I parried as best I could, trying to remain poised, but inside I was seething. This wasn't a family welcome, it was a social vivisection. Later that week, after another perfectly pleasant dinner where Mallory managed to subtly insult my choice of wine, my understanding of art, and my rather bold business expansion plans, Neil walked me to my car. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his keys. "So," he started, avoiding my eyes. "Mom and Dad, they really like you, Zara? They do?" I raised an eyebrow. "They have a funny way of showing it." He winced. "They're just old-fashioned, protective. You know how it is." I didn't, actually. My family was loud, loving, and couldn't care less about someone's bank balance as long as they were a good person. "Anyway," he continued, finally looking at me, his expression pleading, they wanted to have a little chat with us about, the future and protecting the family assets. Just a formality, really, before the wedding." My stomach tightened. I knew this was coming. I'd read enough, heard enough stories. It wasn't a shock, but hearing it from Neil, after all his talk of my brilliance and independence, felt like a betrayal. "A chat?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Or an interrogation?" The little chat was, as I suspected, a full-blown ambush. We were ushered into Robert's study, a room paneled in dark wood, smelling of old books and even older money. Mallory sat behind a large mahogany desk that looked like it had witnessed generations of Harrison power plays. Robert stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, a silent, imposing sentinel. Neil hovered near the door, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mallory gestured to the two stiff-backed chairs in front of the desk. "Zara, dear, do sit down. Neil, you too." Her voice was all honey, but her eyes were pure steel. A thick document lay on the polished surface between us. "Now," she began, once we were seated, "as you know, Zara, our family has certain responsibilities, a legacy to protect. Robert and I, and indeed Neil, feel it's prudent to have certain agreements in place before you two embark on this wonderful journey together." She slid the document across the desk. "Just a formality, dear, to ensure everyone feels secure." Her eyes, however, didn't say secure. They screamed gold digger. I picked up the document. The legal jargon was dense, but the gist was brutally clear. In the event of a divorce, I would walk away with nothing. Not a penny of Harrison money, no claim to any assets acquired during the marriage, nothing. It was a comprehensive, ironclad disinheritance. My hands trembled slightly as I skimmed the pages. I could feel the blood draining from my face. This wasn't protection. This was a declaration of distrust, an insult wrapped in legalese. "This is—" I started, my voice barely a whisper. "Standard procedure for families like ours, Zara," Mallory interjected smoothly. "I'm sure you understand. It's not personal." Oh, it felt incredibly personal. It felt like every condescending remark, every dismissive glance, had been leading to this moment. I looked at Neil. His face was pale, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. "Neil?" He cleared his throat. "Zara, it's just what they want, to keep the peace. It doesn't mean anything about us, about how I feel." "Doesn't it?" I asked, my voice gaining a little strength. "It feels like it means quite a lot, actually." "Please, Zara," he mumbled, finally meeting my eyes, his filled with a desperate plea. "Just sign it. For me. For us. For them," he meant. My heart, which had soared with such hope when I met Neil, now felt like a lead weight in my chest. The hurt was a physical ache, sharp and deep. But beneath the hurt, a cold anger began to smolder. They thought I was a fool. They thought I was so desperate to marry into their precious family that I'd sign away my dignity. The next morning, I was in Ivy Weaver's office. Ivy, my lawyer, was a whirlwind of sharp intellect and even sharper suits. She'd been with me since Innovate Solutions was just a business plan scribbled on a napkin. She was more than a lawyer. She was a mentor and a friend. I slid the prenup across her desk. They want me to sign this. Ivy read it, her expression growing more thunderous with each page. By the time she finished, her lips were a thin, hard line. "The unmitigated gall of these people," she finally said, her voice tight with outrage. "This isn't a prenuptial agreement, Zara. This is a financial execution. They're treating you like a common grifter." "Neil wants me to sign it to keep the peace," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Ivy snorted. "Peace for whom exactly? Certainly not for you." She leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her chin. "All right. They want to play hardball? We can play hardball." A tiny spark of hope ignited within me. "What do you mean?" "They're so focused on protecting their assets," Ivy said, a predatory glint in her eye. "They've probably not even considered yours. Innovate Solutions is already worth a significant amount, and its growth potential is astronomical. We add a reciprocal clause, something simple, buried deep. It states that all your premarital assets, specifically naming Innovate Solutions, and all its future earnings, profits, and intellectual property remain solely and exclusively yours, untouchable by Neil or his family, regardless of circumstance. No community property, no commingling. Yours, period." "Can we do that?" I asked, a surge of adrenaline coursing through me. "Oh, we can absolutely do that," Ivy said with a grim smile. "They want to protect their legacy? Fine, you protect yours." She drafted the clause, a masterpiece of legal subtlety, and we strategically placed it within a dense section about asset disclosure. It looked innocuous, just another piece of boilerplate. A few days later, I sat once more in Robert's study, the revised document in front of me. Mallory watched me like a hawk, a smug little smile playing on her lips. Neil just looked relieved that this ordeal was almost over. I took a deep breath, picked up the pen, and signed their insulting prenup. I feigned reluctance, a hint of resignation. I even managed a watery smile for Neil. As I signed, I caught Mallory's triumphant glance. She thought she'd won, that she'd successfully caged the gold digger. I offered a small, tight smile back. She had no idea the real protection in that document was mine. The wedding was a lavish Harrison affair, exactly as you'd expect. Hundreds of guests I didn't know, oceans of champagne, and enough flowers to fill a botanical garden. I wore a beautiful dress, smiled for the cameras, and danced with my new husband. But through it all, I felt like an outsider, an actress playing a role. Mallory was in her element, gliding among her guests, the queen of her domain. Every time her gaze landed on me, I saw that same smugness. Little did she know, the game had just begun, and I was holding a trump card she hadn't even realized was in play. The years that followed our wedding were a study in contrasts. Innovate Solutions, my baby, exploded. We launched product after product that revolutionized our sector. We expanded globally. Our valuations soared into the billions. I was on magazine covers, speaking at international forums, living and breathing the exhilarating chaos of a company hitting its stride. I poured every ounce of my energy, my intellect, and my passion into it. It wasn't just a business. It was my sanctuary, the one place where I felt completely in control, completely myself. The success was sweet, a validation of my vision and hard work. Meanwhile, Harrison Holdings, the century-old manufacturing behemoth that was the source of Mallory's immense pride, began to show its age. Robert, who had inherited the CEO title rather than earned it, was resistant to change. He clung to outdated practices, dismissed new technologies, and seemed to believe the company's legacy alone would keep it afloat. The world was changing, but Harrison Holdings was stuck in the past, a lumbering dinosaur in a fast-paced ecosystem. The whispers started subtly, a missed earnings target here, a delayed product launch there. Nothing to cause alarm, not yet, but the cracks were beginning to appear. Mallory, of course, remained blissfully, or perhaps willfully, ignorant. At family dinners, which I still attended with a practiced smile, she'd make her usual subtle digs. It must be so volatile, Zara, your industry. Up one day, down the next. Not like good, solid manufacturing. Bricks and mortar, dear. That's what endures. I'd just nod. There's certainly a lot of movement, Mallory. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast, but she never seemed to notice. My marriage to Neil suffered. The more successful Innovate Solutions became, the more distant he seemed. He was proud, he said, but there was an undercurrent of something else. Resentment, perhaps? Or maybe it was the increasing stress from his own family's financial situation. He'd taken a senior role at Harrison Holdings, a position he was ill-suited for, and the pressure was clearly getting to him. He'd come home late, smelling of stale coffee and anxiety, his conversations increasingly peppered with complaints about market conditions and unfair competition. The lavish lifestyle the Harrisons were accustomed to didn't change, even as their company's fortunes dwindled. The parties were still extravagant, the shopping trips to Europe still frequent. But now there was a frantic edge to it all, a desperate clinging to the trappings of wealth. One evening, Neil was pacing our living room, a glass of scotch in his hand. He'd been quiet all through dinner, his brow furrowed. "Everything okay?" I asked, looking up from my laptop. I was reviewing quarterly projections for Innovate Solutions, and they were, frankly, spectacular. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's just, things at Holdings are a bit tight. Dad's stressed. We're looking at needing to modernize the main plant. It's going to require a significant capital injection." I nodded sympathetically. "That sounds like a big undertaking." He swirled the scotch in his glass, avoiding my gaze. "It is a very big undertaking." He paused, then said, almost too casually, "You know, Zara, Innovate Solutions is doing so incredibly well. You have so much liquidity." I waited. I knew where this was going. "Family helps family, right?" he continued, finally looking at me, a hopeful, almost desperate look in his eyes. "That's what families do." "Are you asking me for money, Neil?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He flinched. "Not asking, exactly. Just exploring options. Thinking aloud." I closed my laptop. "Innovate Solutions is a publicly traded company, Neil. I have a fiduciary duty to my shareholders. We don't just hand out cash because someone in my extended family needs it." "But you're the majority shareholder," he protested. "You could make it happen." "It doesn't work that way," I said gently, though a cold knot was forming in my stomach. This was new territory. He'd never directly suggested I use my company's resources to bail out his family before. He drained his scotch and slammed the glass down on the coffee table a little too hard. "Right, of course. Your company, your shareholders." The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. A few weeks later, he tried a different tack. We were getting ready for bed. He sat on the edge of the mattress, fiddling with his watch. "Hypothetically, Zara," he began, his voice carefully neutral, "if Harrison Holdings needed a significant capital injection to, say, modernize, would Innovate Solutions consider an investment? As a strategic partner, perhaps?" I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. The audacity was breathtaking. After years of being treated like a gold-digging interloper, after being forced to sign a prenup designed to ensure I never saw a penny of their precious family money, now they wanted my company, my success, to save them from their own incompetence. "Hypothetically, Neil," I replied, my voice cool and calm. "Why would it?" He stared at me, his mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't believe I'd even asked the question. The chasm between us, already wide, suddenly felt miles across. The hypothetical question hung in the air for days, unanswered and unaddressed. Neil didn't bring it up again, but the tension in our home was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Harrison Holdings imploded, not gradually, but spectacularly. It started with a new product line they'd rushed to market, some kind of smart home appliance that was anything but. Reports flooded in, malfunctions, safety hazards, even a couple of small fires. The media pounced. "Harrison Holdings fumbles tech debut," screamed one headline. "Century-old company cuts corners, endangers consumers," blared another. Their stock, already ailing, took a nosedive. It was a public relations nightmare, a textbook case of a company trying to innovate without understanding innovation, and worse, without prioritizing quality. The whispers in our social circles, the ones I usually attended with Neil, morphed into loud, concerned murmurs, then outright pitying glances. Mallory, who once held court like a queen, now looked strained, her smile brittle, her eyes darting around as if expecting criticism from every corner. Robert just looked older, grayer, the weight of his company's failure etched onto his face. One evening, Neil cornered me in my home office. He looked terrible, sleep-deprived, agitated, his usually immaculate clothes rumpled. "Zara, we need to talk," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm listening," I replied, turning from my monitor. "Harrison Holdings, it's bad, really bad, worse than anyone knows." He paced the small space, running his hands through his hair repeatedly. "The banks are calling in loans. Creditors are getting nervous. We need a substantial loan, just to tide us over, to stop the bleeding." "A loan?" I repeated, keeping my expression neutral. "Yes, from you, from Innovate Solutions. You have it, Zara. You have more than enough. It's just sitting there, all that excess capital." His eyes were wide, almost frantic. I took a slow breath. Here it was, the direct ask. No more hypotheticals, no more vague suggestions about family helping family. This was desperation. "Neil," I said, my voice calm and steady, "you know my answer to this. Innovate Solutions is not a piggy bank for Harrison Holdings. And as for my personal finances," I paused, letting the unspoken hang in the air. "Our finances are separate. Your family made that abundantly clear before we even got married, remember?" His face flushed a dark red. "Are you serious? You're going to bring that up now? My family is on the verge of losing everything, and you're going to hold a grudge over a piece of paper?" "It wasn't just a piece of paper, Neil," I said, my voice hardening. "It was a statement, a very clear statement about how your family viewed me, about my worth in their eyes, and I respected their wishes. Our finances are separate." "But we're married," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Doesn't that mean anything to you? For God's sake, Zara, this is my family's legacy. My father is devastated. And I'm supposed to sacrifice my company's stability, my shareholders' trust, because your father mismanaged his legacy into the ground?" I stood up, facing him directly. "No, Neil, I won't do it." He stared at me, his chest heaving, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You're cold, Zara. You know that? Unbelievably cold. I can't believe you're doing this." He stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the silent house. I sank back into my chair, my hands shaking slightly. It wasn't easy saying no. A part of me, the part that had once loved him, felt a pang of something akin to pity. But the larger part, the part that remembered Mallory's smug smile as I signed that prenup, felt a grim sort of resolve. The tension in our home became unbearable. We barely spoke. We slept in the same bed, miles apart. He looked at me with open resentment, and I looked at him and saw a stranger, a weak man who had stood by and let his family humiliate me and who now expected me to clean up their mess. Later that week, I was walking past the guest room, which Neil had started using as a makeshift office, to make frantic phone calls. The door was slightly ajar. I heard his voice, low and urgent, then Mallory's, sharp and strained even through the phone. "She refused, Mother! Flat out refused!" Neil was saying, his voice tight with anger and desperation. "Can you believe it? All that money and she won't lift a finger? The gold digger is holding on to her gold." My blood ran cold. So that's what I still was to them, even now, even when they were begging for my help. The gold digger. A grim sense of purpose settled in. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about respect. And they were about to learn a very hard lesson about who they had underestimated. The Harrisons started bleeding assets. First, it was the charming summer cottage in the Hamptons, sold quietly, discreetly. Then, a few notable pieces from their extensive art collection appeared at auction. The society pages, once filled with photos of Mallory at glittering galas, now ran speculative pieces about the financial headwinds facing Harrison Holdings. You could almost taste their desperation in the air. Chelsea Neal's sister was dispatched next. She called me, her voice thick with unshed tears, and asked to meet for coffee. I agreed, curious. We met at a quiet cafe. Chelsea, who usually radiated an air of bored entitlement, looked genuinely distressed. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her designer outfit looking a little less pristine than usual. "Zara," she began, her voice trembling, "I know things have been difficult between you and the family, and with Neil." I sipped my latte, waiting. "But this is our legacy, Zara. Harrison Holdings. It's been in our family for generations. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, they built it from nothing." She conveniently forgot to mention that I had also built something from nothing, something they now desperately needed. "It's not just about Mom and Dad," she continued, tears welling in her eyes. "It's about the future, my children, Neil's future children. Don't you want your children to be part of that legacy?" The audacity of it, using hypothetical, non-existent children to guilt-trip me. "Chelsea," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "my finances are separate from Neil's and from your family's. That was made very clear a long time ago." "But this is different," she pleaded, her voice rising. "This is an emergency. You have the means to help. You could save us. Please, Zara, for the sake of the family. For Neil." "Neil made his choices, Chelsea, and your parents made theirs." I placed my cup down. "I'm sorry for what you're going through, truly, but I can't help you." She stared at me, her face crumpling. The tears finally spilled over. "I don't understand how you can be so heartless." She grabbed her purse and fled the cafe, leaving me to pay the bill. Heartless, or just unwilling to be a doormat anymore? Neil's pressure, meanwhile, escalated from accusatory to outright demanding. He stopped yelling and started pleading, then cajoling, then issuing veiled threats. "Zara, you have to understand," he said one night, following me into the kitchen as I made myself a cup of tea. "If Holdings goes under, we lose everything, the house, everything. Dad, I don't think he'll survive it. Mom is beside herself." "And this is my responsibility how, Neil?" I asked, not turning around. "Because you're my wife," he exclaimed, his voice cracking. "Because you have the power to stop this. You could use your Innovate Solutions shares as collateral, just a small portion, enough to secure a loan for my family, for us." I finally turned, tea forgotten. "My shares? You want me to leverage my company, the company I built, the company your mother accused me of using to trap you, to bail out your family's failing business?" "It's not like that," he insisted, but his eyes couldn't meet mine. "It's a temporary measure. We'll pay it back, with interest." "No, Neil." His face hardened. "You're really going to let them go down? After everything?" "After everything they put me through, you mean?" I shot back. "Yes, I think I am. The final straw, the one that severed any lingering thread of loyalty or affection I might have felt for Neil, came a few days later. Quinn, my business partner and closest friend, called me into her office. She looked grim. "Zara, you need to see this," she said, turning her monitor towards me. It was an email chain. My blood ran cold as I read. Neil had secretly approached one of Innovate Solutions' key investors, a man I'd known and trusted for years. He'd used my name, implying I was fully on board, and tried to leverage my reputation to secure a massive personal loan for Harrison Holdings. He'd painted a picture of me being supportive, of this being a joint spousal effort to save his family's business. He'd lied, blatantly. He'd tried to go behind my back and use my success, my credibility, to fund their sinking ship. The betrayal was a physical blow. It wasn't just about money anymore. This was about trust, about integrity, and he had just torched it all. He what? I whispered, staring at the screen in disbelief. The investor called me, Quinn said, her voice tight with anger. He smelled a rat, wanted to confirm with you directly before even considering it. Good thing he did. I felt a wave of nausea. This man, my husband, was actively trying to undermine me, to use me, to deceive people I respected. That evening, Neil confronted me, his face pale, his eyes haunted. He must have heard the investor had contacted me. My parents are on the brink of losing everything, Zara. Everything. His voice was desperate, pleading. The lawyers are talking about bankruptcy. If you don't help us now, our marriage, I don't see how it survives this. Was that a threat or a plea? I looked at him, at the man I had once loved, the man who now stood before me, a desperate, deceitful stranger. And for the first time I realized I truly didn't care anymore. The last embers of affection had been extinguished by his treachery. Is that so? I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Let it crumble. Let it all burn. The air in our ridiculously oversized living room crackled. Neil stood there, his ultimatum hanging between us like a guillotine blade. Our marriage. I don't see how it survives this. I looked at him, really looked at him. The charming man I'd fallen for was gone, replaced by this hollow-eyed, desperate stranger who reeked of his family's impending doom and his own moral bankruptcy. The discovery of his clandestine attempt to swindle my investor using my name had been the final, decisive blow. Any lingering sentimentality, any shred of doubt about my course of action had evaporated. Let me get this straight, Neil, I began, my voice dangerously calm. You go behind my back, you lie to one of my most important business associates. You try to leverage my company and my reputation without my knowledge or consent, effectively attempting to defraud him, and then you have the audacity to issue me an ultimatum about our marriage. He flinched, color rising in his pale cheeks. I was desperate, Zara. You weren't listening. I had to do something. Something deceitful? Something that could have irrevocably damaged my professional standing? I shook my head, a humorless laugh escaping me. You know, for years, your mother painted me as the calculating one, the gold digger. Turns out, the real schemer in this family wasn't me. That's not fair, he protested weakly. I was trying to save my family by sacrificing my integrity, by potentially dragging my company into your family's mess. I walked closer to him, my gaze unwavering. Your family made their bed, Neil. They were arrogant, short-sighted, and frankly, terrible at business. And you? You stood by and let them treat me like dirt, then expected me to clean up the mess when their empire started to crumble. You didn't defend me then, and you're certainly not defending me now. You're just trying to use me. His shoulders slumped. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a weary resignation. So that's it then? You're just going to watch them burn? They lit the match, Neil, I said softly. I'm just choosing not to be the fire department. The argument, if you could even call it that, was explosive in its finality. There were no more tears, no more pleading from him, just a vast, empty silence that confirmed everything was, indeed, over between us. He retreated, defeated, and I felt nothing, just a cold, clear sense of purpose. The next day my phone rang. Caller ID, Mallory. I let it ring a few times before answering, taking a moment to compose myself, to steel my resolve. This was it, the summons. Zara, dear, her voice cooed, a syrupy concoction of false concern and thinly veiled command. It was the same tone she'd used when presenting the prenup, the one that dripped with condescension while pretending benevolence. How are you? I'm fine, Mallory, I replied, my voice even, betraying nothing. And you? A delicate sigh traveled down the line. Oh, Zara, things are difficult, as I'm sure Neil has told you. A pause, clearly expecting me to fill it with sympathetic noises. I remained silent. Robert and I, she continued, her voice taking on a slightly more urgent edge, we feel it's time we all sat down, as a family. There are things we need to discuss, important things. We'd like you and Neil to come to the house this evening. It's urgent. As a family. The irony was almost laughable. We were never a family. I was always the outsider, the tolerated appendage, the one they were waiting to expose as unworthy. A cold anticipation filled me. This wasn't just a discussion. This was their last stand. This was the moment they would officially, formally, grovel. After years of their thinly veiled insults, their smug superiority, their blatant disdain, they were finally going to have to ask me, Zara, the gold digger, to save them. The thought sent a shiver, not of fear, but of something akin to exhilaration, down my spine. I had waited for this moment, consciously or unconsciously, for years. Every slight, every condescending remark, every dismissive glance, it had all been leading here. Of course, Mallory, I replied, my voice smooth as glass. What time? 7 o'clock, dear. And Zara? Yes? Thank you. It means a great deal to us. Her voice was laced with a humility I'd never heard from her before. It was almost convincing. Almost. I hung up the phone, a slow, knowing smile spreading across my face. The game was set. The pieces were in place, and I knew exactly how I was going to play my winning hand. I glanced at the framed photo on my desk, me and Quinn, laughing, at the Innovate Solutions IPO celebration. They thought they could break me, diminish me. They had no idea what they had truly unleashed. Tonight, the Harrisons would learn the true price of their pride, and I would savor every single moment of it. I arrived at the Harrison estate at precisely 7. The grand, imposing facade, usually so intimidating with its aura of old money and unshakable power, now seemed diminished. The manicured lawns were just a little less perfect. A few lights in the sprawling mansion were dark, and an almost palpable air of decay hung in the evening air. It was subtle, but I noticed. A grim-faced housekeeper, one I vaguely recognized from years of stilted holiday dinners, showed me into the formal drawing room. Mallory, Robert, and a hollow-eyed, utterly defeated-looking Neil were waiting. The room, usually so opulent and filled with the murmur of polite society, felt like a tomb. The silence was heavy, thick with unspoken fear and desperation. Mallory, ever the gracious hostess, even on the precipice of ruin, gestured towards a silk brocade armchair. Zara, dear, thank you for coming. Her voice was strained, the usual imperious tone replaced by a forced, fragile warmth. Robert merely nodded, his face ashen. Neil wouldn't meet my eyes. I sat, placing my clutch purse deliberately on the small antique table beside me. I felt remarkably calm, a chillingly serene spectator at their impending implosion. They launched into it, a carefully rehearsed, yet utterly transparent performance. Mallory went first, her voice trembling slightly. Zara, Robert and I, we know there have been misunderstandings in the past. Perhaps we haven't always appreciated you, your strengths, as we should have. Misunderstandings? That was a new one. Robert cleared his throat, his voice raspy. What Mallory is trying to say, Zara, is that we may have misjudged you in the early days. He actually looked pained to admit it. Neil remained silent, staring at his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Then came the appeals, laced with feigned remorse and a heavy dose of desperation. They spoke of family duty, of shared history, conveniently forgetting how they'd tried to exclude me from theirs, and of the devastating impact the collapse of Harrison Holdings would have on so many innocent people, their employees, their legacy, Their social standing? Mallory leaned forward, her eyes, usually so sharp and assessing, now wide and pleading. Zara, we need your help. Harrison Holdings needs a significant infusion of capital to survive, a bailout, if you will. She named a figure, a staggering multi-million-dollar sum that would barely make a dent in Innovate Solutions' quarterly profits, but would be everything to them. If you provide this investment, she continued, her voice gaining a desperate urgency, Robert and I are prepared to offer you a meaningful role in a revitalized Harrison Holdings, a seat on the board, perhaps even an executive position. You have such a keen business mind, Zara. We see that now. A meaningful role? After years of being treated like an unwelcome interloper? The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of it almost made me laugh out loud. I let them talk. I listened patiently, my expression carefully neutral, as they exhausted their arguments, their pleas, their pathetic attempts at flattery. I let the silence stretch after Mallory's desperate offer, watching the hope drain from her face with each passing second. Then I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. Misunderstandings, I began, my voice soft, yet carrying clearly in the tense room. That's a rather delicate way of putting it, Mallory. I leaned forward slightly. Let me recount a few of these misunderstandings, shall I? I remember being told how quaint my ambitions were. I remember the subtle and not so subtle digs about women who marry up. I remember being scrutinized, judged, and found wanting at every turn. And I distinctly remember being presented with a prenuptial agreement designed to ensure that if my marriage to your son failed, I would walk away with absolutely nothing. Because in your eyes, I was, and I quote Neil from a recent phone call with you, Mallory, a gold digger. Mallory's face, which had been a mask of desperate hope, began to contort, first with disbelief, then with a dawning, horrified understanding. Robert stared, aghast, his mouth slightly open. Neil finally looked up, his face a mask of utter devastation, as if the full weight of his family's hubris and his own spinelessness was crashing down on him all at once. You were so very careful to protect your assets from me, I continued, my voice still calm, but with an undeniable edge of steel. So focused on ensuring the gold digger didn't get her hands on your precious family money. But you see, Mallory, Robert, you overlooked one small detail. I paused, savoring the moment. My lawyer, Ivy, is a very thorough woman. She insisted on a reciprocal clause in our prenup, a tiny little paragraph buried deep in all that legal jargon you were so proud of. It states, quite clearly, that all my premarital assets, specifically Innovate Solutions, and all its future earnings, profits, and intellectual property remain solely and exclusively mine, untouchable by Neil, untouchable by his family, regardless of circumstance. I let that sink in. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Mallory's ragged breathing. So, to answer your request, I said, my smile widening just a fraction. No, I won't give you a dime, not one single penny. Mallory's face crumpled. The carefully constructed facade of the proud matriarch shattered, revealing the terrified, desperate woman beneath. Fury warred with despair on her features. Robert looked like he'd been physically struck. Neil just looked broken, utterly and completely. You see, Mallory, I said, standing slowly, picking up my clutch. The only legacy I was ever interested in protecting was my own, and I've done that quite successfully. I paused at the door, turning back to deliver the final, crushing blow. And speaking of legacies, Innovate Solutions is currently in talks to acquire a certain struggling manufacturing company. Its assets are going for a song. Apparently, the current owners mismanaged it into the ground. Their faces, already pale, drained of all remaining color. The unspoken name of Harrison Holdings hung in the air between us, a death knell. I walked out, leaving them in the ruins of their fallen empire. The silence that followed me down the grand staircase was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Within weeks, Harrison Holdings, unable to secure any further credit or find a white knight investor, declared bankruptcy. The news blazed across financial headlines, a cautionary tale of old money arrogance meeting new world realities. The estate, that monument to their perceived invincibility, went on the auction block. The society pages, once filled with their triumphs, now feasted on their downfall, dissecting every misstep, every desperate measure. And of course, the delicious gossip of my refusal to bail them out, the gold digger, who turned out to have all the gold, was the juiciest tidbit of all. Neil, caught in the crossfire between his ruined, furious family and the wife he had so spectacularly betrayed, tried to bridge the unbridgeable gap. He showed up at my apartment. I'd moved out of our marital home the day after the confrontation, looking even more haggard and lost than before. "Zara," he began, his voice a hoarse whisper, I'm sorry. For everything. For not standing up for you. For what I tried to do with your investor. It was a pathetic apology. Too little. Far too late." The words felt hollow, extracted by desperation rather than genuine remorse. "Are you sorry, Neil?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe, not inviting him in. "Or are you just sorry you got caught, and sorry that your family's gravy train has derailed?" He flinched. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" I countered. "You stood by for years while your mother insulted me. You practically begged me to sign that prenup. You called me a gold digger behind my back. And then, when your family's incompetence finally caught up with them, you tried to manipulate me and my business to save them. So tell me, Neil, what part of this isn't fair?" He had no answer. He just stared at the floor, a broken man. I didn't wait for one. "My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion save a weary finality. "The prenup your mother was so keen on will make it a very clean break. You get nothing from me, as was always her intention for me, ironically." He looked up then, a flicker of something, panic, in his eyes. "Zara, please." "Goodbye, Neil," I said, and gently closed the door. I heard later that his parents, blaming him for failing to secure my bailout, had effectively disowned him. He was left with nothing, no family fortune, no wife, no career to speak of. Just the bitter taste of consequences. The days that followed were quiet. There was a profound sense of release, like a massive weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The drama, the constant undercurrent of disapproval and manipulation that had defined my marriage, was gone. Innovate Solutions continued its upward trajectory, a testament to actual innovation and sound management. We did, in fact, acquire some of Harrison Holdings' more viable assets out of bankruptcy, at a steep discount, of course. It was a purely strategic business decision, but I won't deny the small, cold sliver of satisfaction it brought. Quinn, my ever-loyal partner and friend, had been my rock through it all. One evening, not long after the dust had truly settled, we were on the rooftop terrace of our new corporate headquarters, overlooking the glittering city skyline. We were celebrating another record-breaking quarter. She raised her champagne flute. "To karma," she said, her eyes twinkling, "and to exceptionally well-drafted legal documents." I clinked my glass against hers, a genuine smile, light and unburdened, spreading across my face. "I'll drink to that." "You know," she said, looking out at the sprawling metropolis, "they really did a number on you, or tried to." "They did," I acknowledged, sipping the champagne. It tasted like victory. "They underestimated me. They saw a young woman, successful, yes, but in their eyes, still someone they could control, someone whose worth was measured by who she married, not by what she built." "Their mistake," Quinn said firmly. "Their biggest," I agreed. The pain they had inflicted, the years of subtle humiliations and outright disrespect, hadn't vanished, but it no longer held power over me. It had been transmuted into something else: resolve, strength, and an unshakable belief in my own value. It wasn't just about the money, you know, I said, more to myself than to Quinn. It was about respect. It was about them finally seeing me, not as an accessory or a target, but as a force to be reckoned with. Quinn nodded. And they saw it. Boy, did they see it? The look on Mallory's face when you told her about that reciprocal clause? Priceless. I laughed, a real hearty laugh. It was, wasn't it? We stood there for a while, watching the city lights twinkle to life. They had tried to break me, to make me small, to fit me into their narrow gilded cage. Instead, they had forged me into the woman who would not only survive their machinations, but would ultimately watch them fall, brought down by their own arrogance and greed. The revenge, cold and precisely executed, wasn't just satisfying, it was a reclamation of my power, my dignity. And that, I thought, looking out at the city that felt like mine, truly mine, was indeed priceless.